Beneath the velvet hills of Saint Armand, nestled between damp vineyards and fog-choked woods, stood Chateau Le Griff, the Claw, a fortress of gray stone and whispering corridors whose windows hadn't been opened in decades. Locals spoke its name like a wound, quickly, softly, lest it bleed. For within its walls lived one of France's most elusive noblemen, Duc Etienne de Verneau, a man as silent as his halls and as secretive as the godless chapel that pulsed beneath his feet. He was not born to horror, he was born to power. The seventh son of a line that claimed blood thicker than the Pope's wine, Etienne was delicate from birth, frail, pale, and profoundly silent. His governess once claimed he did not cry until his third day alive, and when he did, the sound was like glass breaking under water. But what the child lacked in vigor, he made up in vision. By the time he was 10, he could name the phrenological ridges of a skull faster than his tutors. He collected deformities, not in books, but in bones. Tiny femurs of malformed infants, dissected hearts in salt brine, sketches of cyclopean babies copied from condemned midwives. While others learned Latin, Etienne mastered silence, the silence of the womb, of secrets, of those born wrong and discarded like broken rosaries. At 17, upon the death of his final brother in a hunting accident that reeked of orchestration, Etienne inherited Le Griff. He was now the Duke, the last Verneau. The castle became colder. Torches were replaced with gaslight. The chapel, long abandoned, began to thrum at night with chanting no priest could translate. And the villagers began to see something darker. Cloaked carriages arriving at dusk, carrying infants wrapped in black linen. Mothers never seen again. Midwives bribed or vanished. The official story was mercy. That the Duke had founded an orphanage beneath his estate for unfortunate children, those cursed by nature. It was even blessed by a bishop with trembling hands. But no child was ever seen leaving. Only the smoke, heavy metallic, curling up through the old monastery stones like burnt silk. Rumors spread like fungus, that the Duke believed deformity was divine, that twisted flesh housed unfiltered souls. Some said he thought God made mistakes on purpose, and that inside the malformed there hid ancient truths. Others whispered he was trying to speak to God, not through prayer, but through pain. Pain of the purest kind, the pain of those too young to lie, too new to disobey. Beneath the chateau the halls deepened, dug not by masons but by madmen. Vaulted chambers lined with iron, a slab of marble with channels for draining. Hooks not meant for restraint but for display. Journals, hundreds of them filled with diagrams of infant tongues, their vibrations under duress, and ink sketches of fetuses in glass. He was not a sadist. It was something worse. A scientist with faith. A man who saw torture not as cruelty, but as confession. No one dared question the Duke. His wealth, his titles, his donations to the church kept him untouchable. But those who lived near Le Griff learned not to birth loudly, learned to burn their cribs if the child came out wrong, learned to bury their mistakes far from the Duke's hunting grounds, for fear he might come with offers too generous and hands too cold. And still, Le Griff remained quiet, castle above, a mausoleum below, and the Duke, he waited. Not for redemption, nor for reason, but for the child he believed would be born wrong enough to open heaven or hell. With a scream, in the winter of 1783, under a moon fat with frost, a midwife was summoned to the edge of the Verneau estate. Her name was Maria Listabel, old and half-blind, known for delivering difficult births no priest would bless. She was brought not to the gates, but to a frozen riverbank, where a woman in labor lay beneath a blood-stained shroud. The child came screaming, but not from its mouth. It screamed through its nose, in bursts like wind through reeds. It had only one eye, centered in its forehead like a cracked pearl, and it smiled. Mary Liss knew what must happen. She reached for the stone she kept hidden in her apron, a mercy-killing like she'd done before. But before she could lift it, a black carriage emerged from the fog. The door opened. The Duke's steward stepped out, his eyes pale with purpose. "The Duke is ready," he said. "He's been waiting for this one." No resistance was offered.
Right.
The child, still pulsing with afterbirth, was wrapped in velvet and taken. Morellis was given gold and told to forget. But she didn't. She returned to the village, screaming of the Cyclops, of the devil's smile. 3 days later, her cottage burned. No bones were found. The child, meanwhile, was taken deep beneath Le Griff, deeper than the crypts, deeper than the ossuary of infants, long drained. Yes, this chamber had no name. The Duke called it Le Voix Silence Os, the silent voice. Its walls were lined with rows of old leather straps and curved glass tubes. At its center stood a single chair of ivory and iron, carved with symbols that predated Latin. The child was placed there. The Duke waited. For days, he did not touch the child. He watched, he measured, he prayed. He believed this child, this one-eyed aberration, was not a mistake of nature, but a key sent by divine hands. The singular eye, he theorized, was not a flaw, but a focus, a vessel through which undivided truth could flow. In his journals, he wrote, "He is unburdened by duality, one eye, one mind, one scream. In that unity, there is something older than God." On the 7th day, the child laughed, loud and melodic, though its mouth remained shut. The sound shook the chandeliers above. Mirrors cracked. One servant collapsed, bleeding from his ears. The Duke did not flinch. He approached and began the process. With silver tools cooled in holy water, he opened the scalp slowly, reverently. The child did not cry. Instead, it blinked. Once, and the Duke whispered, almost lovingly, "Show me what's behind the veil." What happened next is disputed, even in the Duke's own writings, which degrade into erratic diagrams and runes. But one thing is clear. The child spoke. It's not in French, nor Latin, nor any known tongue. Its voice was a melody, a rhythm like reversed bells or heartbeat in a dream. The Duke wept. It's not from horror, but from awe. He called it the language of before, a sound he believed predated Eden, a frequency that did not carry meaning but unmade it. Those who heard it too long reported visions of infinite wombs, of angels with mouths stitched shut, of time folding in on itself like wet parchment. The Duke recorded everything, every pulse, every note, every flicker in the child's eye. He began to speak to it in kind, not with words, but with blood. His own. Small cuts offered nightly, each drop landing on the infant's tongue. Then the dreams began. The servants above reported hearing lullabies from beneath the floor, in voices not born of humans. Statues in the chapel wept, not tears, but milk. The rats vanished. The bells rang without hands. And in the nursery where malformed infants were once kept, every crib stood empty. No child had been brought to Le Griff in weeks. And yet lullabies continued. The Duke grew thin, translucent. He rarely ate. His hair turned white in a single night. He claimed the child had shown him what came before flesh, that he had seen the first womb, the place where souls were chosen or discarded. He now believed there was no God, only a voice, and that the malformed heard it more clearly than the rest. And so he began building a second chamber. But this one was not for observation. It was for communion. They called it the Chambre de Communion, though none who entered could speak of it. Carved deep into the granite bowels of Chateau Le Griff, it was said to be lined not with stone, but with skulls. Infant skulls fused into the walls like oyster shells. The ceiling was a dome, perfectly circular, etched with symbols that pulsed under candlelight. In the center lay a shallow basin of polished obsidian. It was not meant for water. It reflected only what was absent. The Duke entered alone, dragging the one-eyed child wrapped in velvet, now strangely still. For weeks it had not laughed, had not blinked. He feared it was fading, and so he turned to ritual. He placed the child into the basin, anointed its lips with his own blood, and whispered words not written in any gospel. The candles extinguished themselves, and in the dark he heard others breathing. He was no longer alone. For 3 days the chamber remained sealed. No sounds escaped, except once. A low choral hum like monks mourning underwater. When he emerged, his robes were scorched, his mouth blistered, but his eyes were no longer his. They spoke, he said to no one, not in words, not to me, but through me. He had become the vessel. He proclaimed that the malformed were not mistakes. They were mouthpieces, designed not for this world, but for what lay beneath it. He ordered his servants to recover the discarded, to dig up buried infants long hidden by fearful villagers. When they protested, he said, "You fear the rot, but rot is the language of truth." By spring, 12 children had been brought into La Griffe. Each bore a deformity, spines like serpents, tongues forked like scripture, torn in two, skin translucent as prayer veils. He placed them in the communion room, each in a basin of their own. For 7 nights, he sat among them, fasting, bleeding, humming that strange reversed lullaby he had learned from the Cyclopean child. Then, on the 8th night, the children began to sing. It wasn't a melody, it was a code. The walls sweated. The crucifixes split. 8. Wine turned to bile. One servant, trying to remove a child, dropped dead on the spot. Mouthful of teeth, not his own, the Duke wrote. They are not speaking. They are remembering. Through me they recall the world before light, before time crawled into clocks. The local priest attempted to intervene, quietly at first. But when Father Ambroise entered the chateau and never returned, his cassock later found filled with blood but no bones. The church grew louder. Still the Duke ignored them. He claimed to have received a new revelation. God is not a creator, is a jailer and malformed children. They are escapees broken by design so their souls can slip through the cracks. He believed the communion room had become a womb of inversion, a place where holy reality could be unlearned. And the only way to complete the transformation was for him to be reborn. And so, the Duke, now skeletal, delirious, marked with symbols carved into his own chest, entered the basin himself. He placed the Cyclops child in his arms, lit black candles, and ordered the room sealed. Inside, the children sang, not louder, but deeper. The floor cracked. Stone bled. Screams echoed upward through the chapel's bells, which rang without rope. The castle groaned. Servants fled. The gates of La Griffe blew open as if exorcised. Then, silence. When the chamber was unsealed 3 days later, the basins were empty, the children gone, the Duke gone. Only the obsidian basin remained, now filled with teeth. Hundreds of them, infant and adult, clean, dry, still warm. And at the center, floating like a lily, a single eye, unblinking, staring upward at nothing. For years, the chateau stood silent. Overgrown vines strangled its balconies. The chapel's stained glass wept black as if in mourning. No air came forward. The Verno line was declared extinct. Some claimed the Duke had fled to Africa, others to a monastery in the Pyrenees. But those who had heard the lullabies knew better. They said La Griffe had eaten him, consumed him whole in the name of something older than divinity. No record of the one-eyed child remained. No bones, no birth certificate. Not even the midwife's name existed in church registry. All documents tied to the communion chamber were seized or lost in a suspicious fire at the diocese. But one object endured. One thing could not be destroyed. The eye. It was found again in 1891 by an archaeologist named Lucien Morel, who, intrigued by rumors of hollow rooms beneath forgotten estates, entered La Griffe under the cover of dusk. He never reached the chamber. He did not need to. The eye found him first. It floated in the well behind the chapel, clean, intact, as though preserved by no substance except its own defiance of rot. He took it, placed it in a glass jar, brought it back to Paris. The night he returned, he wrote, "It watches even with the lid closed, not outward, but inward, into me." Lucien began sketching shapes in his sleep, rings of infant limbs, crucifixes drawn upside down, but with mouths instead of heads. He would speak in syllables no one understood. Then he would wake, bleeding from his eyes. Within a month, he was institutionalized. The eye was confiscated by the École des. It vanished during the German occupation, or so the records say. But reports would surface in decades that followed. Whispers, murmurs. A military lab in the Ardennes, experimenting on brainwave frequency, found an anomaly. A signal emitting at 3:33 a.m. every Sunday. From nowhere, in tones that made infants cry and mothers vomit blood. A blind girl in Marseille drew a circle of basins in chalk, then screamed until her lungs collapsed. When asked why, she said, "I saw the room with the singing children." 2004. During renovations at the ruins of Le Griffe, construction crews unearthed a door sealed behind melted brick. The door was engraved with only one symbol, a single vertical eye, ringed with infant teeth. The workers refused to open it. They said something was breathing behind it, not loud, not angry, but expectant. The site was closed. Official reason: structural instability. But satellite scans revealed that beneath the ruin lies a perfectly symmetrical chamber, and at its center, a heat signature. No one has entered since. But sometimes, when fog covers the valley and the chapel bells ring without wind, children in nearby villages wake up humming a tune no adult knows. A tune with no melody, no rhythm, no origin. And in that breathless silence, mothers whisper the only prayer they remember: "Let my child be whole. Let my child be quiet. Let my child not be seen." Because they know the Duke was wrong. It wasn't the malformed who heard the voice most clearly. It was the ones who listened.